that I'm no longer afraid of children's messages because Tom gives them. Well, this morning, our scripture reading is from Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 through 10. Early on Sunday morning, as the new day was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went out to visit the tomb. Suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, rolled aside the stone, and sat on it. His face shone like lightning, and his clothing was as white as snow. The guards shook with fear when they saw him, and they fell into a dead faint. Then the angel spoke to the women. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He isn't here. He is risen from the dead, just as he said would happen. Come, see where his body was lying. And now go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead, and he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. Remember what I have told you." The women ran quickly from the tomb. They were very frightened, but also filled with great joy, and they rushed to give the disciples the angel's message. And as they went, Jesus met them and greeted them. And they ran to him, grasped his feet, and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Don't be afraid. Go tell my brothers to leave for Galilee, and they will see me there." May God bless us in the reading of his word. One of my volunteer opportunities as a retired person is volunteering for the Fox Cities Performing Arts Center. It's always good to go there, and one of the benefits of volunteering there is I get to see many good shows and concerts and that kind of thing. But one of the things that we're looking forward to in the coming weeks, it begins the last day in May and starts the first week of June, is the musical Beautiful. And Beautiful is kind of a story about Carole King, who co-wrote many wonderful songs, if you like her type of music. Along with Jerry Goffin, she wrote such songs like Locomotion, that was made famous by her babysitter, Little Eva. She also wrote You've Got a Friend, that James Taylor made popular. She made famous Up on the Roof, that the Drifters made famous. So her music spans many decades. One of the songs that she co-wrote was the song, I Feel the Earth Move. Now listen to those lyrics within the context of today. I feel the earth move under my feet. I feel the sky tumbling down. I feel my heart start to trembling. Those lyrics could have been the words of Mary Magdalene and the other Mary as they came to that tomb on that first Sunday morning. I mean, they went to this tomb not expecting anything out of the ordinary. They were just there to anoint Jesus' body properly, as they weren't able to do this prior to that time. But suddenly there was a great earthquake. Matthew puts in that word great. This is a significant earthquake. Now, Israel does have earthquakes, but this still was a surprise to these women on that first Easter morning. No doubt this earthquake was very unsettling for them, as an earthquake would be very unsettling for any of us. Following the earthquake, an angel appears. He comes down from heaven, he rolls aside the stone, he sits on it, and we read that his face shone like lightning, and his clothing was as white as snow. It must have been very frightening and terrifying for Mary and Mary, as we can imagine. It's also frightening for the guards, for they fall down into a dead faint. They don't know what to make of this event. But then the angel says to them, "Don't be afraid." I think this is quite impossible considering all that's going on, but the angel says it anyway, "Don't be afraid." Know that fear simply arises within us when we are confronted with a threatening moment. Our adrenaline gets going, our heart races, we feel stress. That's part of what happens when we experience anxiety. We can't imagine that the two Marys are not afraid when all this is going on around them. All know about fear. A man was standing by the side of the road on a dark night in the middle of a storm that was so strong that he could barely see a few feet in front of him. So he was looking for a ride when suddenly a car pulled up alongside of him. And he thought, great, somebody's going to pick me up. So he opens the back door and he gets into the car and he sits down and closes the door. And then he looks ahead because he wants to thank the person who's picking him up. And he notices that there's no one driving the car. And suddenly the car starts going. And he's very confused about this and getting kind of worried about it. And then he notices in the road ahead that there's a curve. I think, great, I'm going to go right off the cliff and that'll be the end of me. But then, just as they get close to that curve, he sees a hand go through the window onto the steering wheel, car out of that curve. And he's very grateful, but at the same time very scared because he sees this just doesn't make sense to him. So this hitchhiker is paralyzed with fear, and he watches as the hand appears every time they come near a curve. So finally, when they get to a place where the car slows down somewhat, he quick opens the car door and runs out and quick runs, and finally he comes across the cafe in a town not too far away. And he asks for some coffee, and he begins to tell the story of this terrifying experience that he has had. And the cafe goes quiet when they see him begin crying like a baby, letting out all the emotion that has been. Well, about 30 minutes later, two guys walk into the same cafe, and one says to the other, "Look, Bob, there's that guy who got into our car when we were pushing it down." Well, this poor, fearful hitchhiker, and poor, fearful Mary and Mary. Now, what Mary and Mary heard next could have easily pushed them over the edge. They hear the angel tell them that this Jesus that they are looking for is not dead, but that he has risen from the grave. Now, this is good news because Jesus is so much alive for them. But such news not only creates joy, but it also creates fear. I mean, how do you process such unbelievable news? How do you make sense of a dead man being resurrected? Perhaps the angel's words help, because the angel says, this is simply what he said he was going to do. Don't you remember? He told you that he would rise from the dead. He's trying to comfort them, but I don't think Well, our angel is very active in this story, and he gives Mary and Mary instructions, telling them to go ahead and tell the disciples that Jesus has risen, as they are told. But notice the mix of emotions here. There is fear and joy. It tells us that they were very frightened, but also filled with great joy. But we understand, because there are lots of places in our lives where we experience this mixture of fear and joy at the same time. Now, some of you have experienced that. If you have kids, you certainly have experienced that. There's this great fear that your kids are going to turn out the way you hope that they turn out, that they'll take on the values that you have instilled in them, that they'll make great choices. Fears that whether or not that's going to happen. But then there's great joy when you see them being raised and following your ways and taking on those values and showing kindness and compassion to others. There's great joy. Oh, just retire. Think about retirement. There's great fear in retirement. Will I have enough money to last until the day I die? What will I do with my time? If we're married, will we drive each other crazy? That kind of stuff. But there's great joy because you have freedom to do what you want. You're not punching a clock anymore. You're your own boss, more or less. That kind of fear and joy mixture. At our church here, there's a mixture of fear and joy. There's fear as you look for a new pastor. Will we be able to find one? Who will God lead to us? But there's also great joy as you look at what you've been able to accomplish, what you've been able to do together, and the fellowship that you enjoy. That's a great experience. Of course, on a broader sense, we see our world as a place of fear and joy. Much fear out there right now with all that's going on in our midst. But also joy at the possibilities, the opportunities that are all sometimes go together as they did for Mary. It's interesting that the resurrection doesn't take away all of Mary Magdalene's and Mary's. You would think that hearing the news of something like that would, but it doesn't. What we see, however, is their ability to keep I mean, isn't it great to know that like Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, we don't have to be free of all anxiety and fear even as we live in the truth of the resurrection? The resurrection doesn't magically take away all our problems and all our concerns, all our anxieties and all our fears. Yet the resurrection gives us hope and joy all the same. Faith in Jesus doesn't necessarily smooth out all the rough places of our lives. It doesn't quiet all the tremors and the earthquakes that we experience from time to time. It does give us hope. One writer, David Luce, explained it this way: I believe that the gospel gives us the ability to keep our feet amid the tremors, enables us not just to persevere, our hope. That kind of hope produces joy within us. Resurrection promises that hope, joy, and faith will ultimately prevail over any earthquakes. So today is a good day for us to ask some questions. For example, we can ask, where is it that you and I are experiencing fear in our lives? What is it that causes us anxiety and hurt? Where is it that we feel somewhat lost and confused? Wherever those places are, places we hope because of the resurrection. Christ being raised from the dead means that these things don't have the last word in our lives. Resurrection and that truth ultimately prevails. Anxiety, worry, concern, confusion, feeling lost don't have the last word. Ultimately, illustration of Winston Churchill's was a prime minister of England during World War II. Quite a very interesting, fascinating person. Churchill planned his funeral service, and he had some great symbolism as part of it. At the end of his service, at the western end of St. Abbey's Cathedral in London, he had a lone trumpeter play taps. Taps is a song that signals dusk and the close of the day and is frequently played at the end of a military funeral. So he had taps played at the western end. But after a moment of stillness and silence, another trumpeter came and stood at the east end of St. Paul's, the end of the church that faced the rising sun. That trumpeter played Reveille, song of the morning, and a call to a new day. Resurrected Jesus, who promised us a new day and a new life because of his own. So this resurrection that we're talking about today gives us hope for this life and also for the life to come. Resurrection gives us hope even in the midst of any fear that we might have. Helps us to press on. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, in joy, begin to run to tell the other disciples that Jesus has risen from the dead. And on the way, they meet Jesus. I think to myself, can they take any more shock and surprise? Quite a worth-taking experience for them. Yet because of this event, their hearts are filled with love for Jesus. They go and grab hold of his feet and they worship him. He says to them, knows that this is shocking, this is hard to grasp, this is hard to take, but he says, don't be afraid. No doubt their fear dissipated. Sometimes we live in fear, but as we live in relationship with Jesus, walk with him on our way, he helps to quiet some of that fear. The ground beneath us quake a little bit. Maybe not literally, but in the way it changes our perspective of things. So it helps us to face the challenges that we face. It helps us to face the way life comes to us in all its fear and all its challenges. It helps us to experience God because of faith. I like those opening lyrics of Carole King. The earth move under my feet. Feel the sky tumbling down. I feel my heart start to trembling. Not experience a literal earthquake like Mary Magdalene and the other Mary did on that first Easter Sunday. However, resurrection does move our being as we are filled with hope and joy despite our fears and despite those earthquakes and those tremors that we experience from time to time. This morning, as we think about the meaning of the resurrection for our lives, let us live in that hope and that joy. In the midst of those fears that we have, even Christ, the risen